Hello everyone, I'm Dakota Fitzsimmons, and this is my oral presentation for Introduction to Film. The two movies that I watched this past week were Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and October Sky. Now, what we have learned about Hillbilly Land and about the people of Appalachia is that there are many people out there who are uneducated and many people who grow up kind of stuck in the same spot. They're kind of stuck in the same rut where they don't have any avenues to get out. They're stuck in Appalachian. That's all they're ever going to know is Appalachia. As I was watching October Sky, what really stood out to me was really just the whole plot of the movie, where Homer grows up and he is expected to be a coal miner just like his dad and the rest of his family, until he finds homemade rockets, and he becomes educated, and he's able to go out and do great things because of the education that he had. Also in the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, the main character played by George Clooney, he also was educated kind of in a different way, educated on his jailbreak, and educated on being able to go out and maneuver himself from place to place to get to his final destination. So even though it was a different sequence, there still was an education that goes with that. So what I have found is a good friend of mine, Trevis Gardner, who has grown up in Appalachia culture, and he is very Appalachia, I would say, probably the most I have known. But at the same time, he is also very well educated, and there is a path that he has taken to better not only himself but his family and the family that goes in front of him. So what I'd like to introduce now is Mr. Trevis Gardner. And Trevis, first off, just to start, just tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us how the Appalachia community and the culture has kind of shaped who you are.
Sure. And George Clooney, that was actually the character Everett McGill.
Everett McGill. That's the name, yes.
It's one of my favorite movies as well. So you told me a little bit about the premise of your presentation. So the things in my life that I think are applicable are me and the family that surrounds me. So the very basics. In fact, the house that I'm living in here is ancestral. It's from Scots, Irish, and German immigrants. Specifically, my great-great-grandparents, great-grandparents, and grandparents that lived here.
Oh, wow.
And so German from my grandfather's side. He was actually a second generation German immigrant from the 1890s immigration period. And then the Scots Irish from around the 1840s on my grandmother's side. I was born in 1968, and I grew up in a house 800 feet away.
So still on the same land.
Same property. My great-great-grandfather had this farm. It was 1,008 acres. As far as anyone would know, my great-grandfather that had no formal education, maybe some very rudimentary elementary education, actually in Cades Cove. And if that's not Appalachia,
exactly.
There's not much else that would qualify. My grandmother, she did have a high school education. My grandfather did not. He had maybe a 6th or an 8th grade education.
Oh, wow.
My mother had very successful in high school, and then she had actually a 2-year education, and then was a registered nurse, and then had some credentials on top of that, roughly analogous to an undergrad degree, but not a formal undergraduate. And then myself, I had a couple of technical degrees, associate's degrees in various engineering disciplines. And then I was actually a senior in engineering when I changed my undergrad program to business.
Oh, wow.
And that was more personality driven than anything. And then I later had an opportunity to go to grad school, complete my thesis, and then do some professional accreditation on top of that. But I think one thing that specifically applies to something that you discussed was my grandfather. When he passed away, one of the things that was most often repeated was, wonder what he could have become if he'd had a formal education, and not necessarily desire, but access to formal education.
Right.
So he was very entrepreneurial, and so one of the nuances of his life is he had a couple of full-time jobs at any given moment. He was a full-time farmer. He worked full-time for TVA. He owned a couple of different properties that he rented and leased out. And so that was one of the things that was pretty common. I was wonder what he could have become if he had access to formal education.
Exactly.
Could he have gone beyond his humble accomplishments? Myself, by any measure of the family, I'm a set of firsts. I'm the first formal college graduate, the first, the first career military member that, as long as we looked at the family lineage, I did about 25 years as a professional military member. I was the first commissioned officer in the military, and in all manner of speaking, I'm the first white collar or managerial by vocation in my family.
I got you. So kind of going back to your grandfather, where you said he had around a 6th to 8th grade education, he kind of set the foundation of this Appalachian culture that you and your family still live on to this day.
Absolutely. You know, my mother was a young widow, which probably hamstrung my academic appetite somewhat, because my grandparents were a huge part of my upbringing. They were Depression era grandparents, born in 1926 and 1928. So, hard work and aptitude, they were tremendous work ethic, tremendous influence on me. So they always encouraged me to do well because they wanted things to be better for me than it had been for them. I mentioned my grandfather had that entrepreneurial spirit and become, for his peers was very successful. So he passed away in 2000. And so I kept aching for something to honor his memory and the tremendous influence he was on me. So for about 5 years, I volunteered as a GED tutor. I mentored folks to prepare for and ultimately test and get their GED, just out of respect for his memory.
Right, that's awesome. That's a good deal. Now, we have learned a lot in this class that the Appalachian culture, there's a lot of stereotypes that goes on with being poverty-stricken or being uneducated. It sounds like your grandfather had the uneducated part, but he set out to have a better life for you and your family.
Oh yeah, and it was through hard work.
Through hard work, definitely. And we've learned that the Appalachian culture is a very hard-working community, and we've also learned that the Appalachian culture is a very tight-knit group. The family stays close together. So it sounds like yourself, you grew up in the Appalachian culture, but you still had the ability to go out and make a better life for yourself with your education. You said you're pretty much the first to graduate, and you're the first white collar, the first commissioned officer, which are all great things. So I guess another question that I have for you is, how does that life of being educated and the first of many compare or contrast, where you still keep in touch with the Appalachian culture that we obviously were still sitting on the property that your grandfather lived on, and your family, I believe you said your mother lives right down the road and all that. So how does the educated and the first commissioned officer still translate and relate and compare to the Appalachian boy that you grew up as?
Well, I think it's embracing the community around me. I think I've checked all the boxes. That's not a very good way to put it, but I've checked all the boxes to become productive in a national or a global economy, to make the skills that I have relevant. But I stay grounded by participating in the community. One of the things that I think is very valuable from the Appalachian culture, one of the values that we can take away, is connection to and service to the community, and that's always been valuable to me. So I participate on a number of nonprofit boards. I founded a nonprofit myself. I ran for and was successful in elected office. I served on the local school board. So I think that is a very positive attribute of the culture that comes from the Appalachians. Is you stay grounded and you keep connected to the community around you, because you want your community to be better. You don't want to leave it better than you found it.
Right.
And that's sometimes an overused cliche of leaving things better than you found it. But I think the variety of cultures that influenced Appalachia, the Western and Eastern Europeans, I think that is one of the positive traits that they left behind, is a sense of community.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. One thing, like I said, I wanted to talk about in this Appalachia video and meeting with Mr. Trevis Gardner was that no matter where you come from in the Appalachia, the big stereotype is uneducated, poverty, but hardworking community. And as we see that Trevis, even though he came from a grandfather that was uneducated, and he came from somewhat of an unknown background, he still was able to go out and be the first of many for his generation to set up success for the future. Something that you talked about was the community aspect of it, and how you didn't want to, and how you want to leave things better than what you found it. Trevis, as we learned, he never had a male figure that had graduated college and go on and become a white collar employee, and all the hard work that he has put in to become that. And with the aspect of not leaving or going things better than what you found it, I believe you said your oldest daughter is now in college, correct?
That's right. I'm proud of that. If I could imprint or create motivation on my kids, the one thing it's a preconceived notion that they're going to go to college, and that's just mandatory. Of course, college isn't for everyone. I get that, and the world needs a great variety of skilled trades, but I want college to be their first option, not their last option.
Definitely. Something that is very that I probably will take away about this is, no matter where you come from, if you come from an Appalachian community or you come from living in the city like myself, there's always still a connection between trying to leave things better than what you have found it. One thing I do admire about the Appalachian culture and meeting with Mr. Trevis is that even though he is educated and has a well-paying job and has done well for himself and for his children, he still lives on the same land that his uneducated and very hardworking grandfather found. And I think that is very remarkable. And that's something that I think we all can take away from, is no matter what you make of yourself in this life, you can always still have a connection to where you came from. And you can always have a connection of not forgetting the hard work that took to get to where you want to be. And so with that, Trevis, I want to say thank you.
Hey, this was fun.
Yeah, thank you for letting us dive into a little bit of the Appalachian culture. And once again, I think it's pretty remarkable that you still live on the same land that your Appalachian family has created. And with that, I'll say thank you and have a good night.